Shalom warriors, Shalom Abraham friends and Israel partners, and welcome to Israel, welcome to Jerusalem. And today we're going to do a shorter update and a teaching. I want to speak mainly about the fact that if you talk about what's happening now in the Israeli politics, in the current politics here in Israel, we are really into a very dire situation. I want you to know that not only that we are experiencing a second wave of an explosion of the COVID-19. We're having much more than 1,000 people infected per day, many people being hospitalized. And this is due to the fact that a lot of the Israelis didn't really follow the rules, didn't really follow the instructions. And unfortunately, it's also very much connected to politics. What's happening now in Israel is literally that a lot of these organizations that are not following and not supporting Benjamin Netanyahu and the right wing and the Likud party are taking the opportunity of the COVID-19 and the economical situation here in the country to start protesting against the governments. But really their main message is just not Bibi. They want to do anything in their power to try and overthrow him from his position as a prime minister, even though they couldn't do it by democratical elections. So we can see that this is happening now in Israel and throughout the country. People are demonstrating. A lot of them are coming to Jerusalem, protesting in front of the prime minister's residency. And on the other hand, we don't hear the partners of the government, blue and white, Kahol Lavan, Benny Gantz, really coming against these people that are protesting. So we're supposed to have a unity government, but unfortunately, I think politically it plays into their hands that there is more and more protests against Benjamin Netanyahu, and people are connecting it to the fact that we are kind of failing with combating the COVID-19 crisis. And today we've seen an example in the Knesset when there was a law that's supposed to be voted against by the unity government of Israel. And even though the Likud party decided that they're going to fulfill the agreement and they would vote against it, blue and white voted in favor of this law, and it passed in the parliament of Israel, as opposed to the fact that when you have a unity government, you should agree on what would be the basic things that you're going to go through in voting in the government, or new laws and things like that. So we're seeing that there is a big situation here which is bringing a lot of disputes in the political system and the political arena here in Israel. And I connect this to what's literally happened 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, when Moses was about to enter the promised land. And we're starting the Torah portion of this week. It's called Devarim, Deuteronomy. This is the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, the first 3 chapters. And here you see a big change. Moses is about to send the people into the promised land. He knows that he's not going to enter. He is actually nominating and blessing his successor, Joshua bin Nun, and he gives the people of Israel a speech. Now we're talking about Moses. Moses, the stutterer, the man that was even afraid to speak to Pharaoh, didn't talk so much during the times of the desert. And here now, he is literally taking the leadership through a speech. He's speaking, talking, and lecturing the words that God had given him to the people of Israel. He reminds them of their disobedience in the desert, all the ways that they sinned against God and how they were all punished, including him, that he was banned from entering in the promised land. And the people of Israel were punished for this generation to die in the desert, and they wandered about for 40 years. And he told them that they're disobedient and they are not accepting the leadership of Moses. What made him have to ask for help and nominate judges and ministers and police officers and people to control and help govern, because the people of Israel didn't accept his leadership straight away. And this is exactly what's happening here in Israel. We see that here in Israel, the people that disagree with the leadership of Netanyahu, they're literally coming against the police officers and against the legal system and against the judges, and there is almost on the verge of some kind of anarchy. So what was happening in the desert before we entered the promised land, Moses gave the rules to the people, and he said to them, if you're going to follow the rules, if you're going to follow the leadership, if you're going to obey the leaders, you are going to stay in this promised land where the boundaries have been given to them. Joshua can control it. God will defeat your enemies and you will take possession of the land, just like you have taken possession of the Amorites and you've taken possession of Og, the king of the Bashan, and all the other nations around you. Every obstacle, God enables you to go through once you listen to your leaders. I'm saying to the people of Israel today, look at what happened to the desert. Look at what happened when we enter the promised land and we disobey God. This will literally destroy our leadership. It will destroy our government, and we will not be able to take possession of the promises of God. It's corresponding with the politics of today. Exactly what happened thousands of years ago, just before we were able to enter into the land. Moses gave the people the warnings. I'm giving the people the warning right now. Israelis, you have to follow the votes. You have to follow what the voters decided. You have to follow the government. You have to follow the rules and the leaders, and you have to listen to the police and to the judges, because no other way we can stay in this land. I love you a lot, Doobie, and I'll see you soon. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom and welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. I pray that you've had a good week. In spite of the chaos, in spite of the craziness that surrounds us, in spite of everything that's going on in the world, we know that our God reigns, we know that He is in control, and we know that He is the one sitting enthroned on high, and He has everything well in order, and the whole earth is in His hands. So let us hold on to that. What I'm going to speak to you today about, I think, does have a lot of correlation to what we're going through right now. The world that we live in is full of pressure. There is social pressure, there's pressure within the Christian community on other Christians to conform to certain things. I feel like this might be the most intense time in history to be alive in terms of the amount of deception that exists, the propagation of that deception, and the availability of that propagation. Because of the internet, because of satellite TV, because of everything that's going on, you don't have to look very far for a deception to come right to our door, and that is what's going on. So there's a story that I want to read. I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm going to have to paraphrase a bunch of it, but it's kind of been in my brain a lot, and I've been thinking about this in the book of Daniel chapter 3. The image of gold in the fiery furnace. Now there's so much here, some people, we can look at this, how King Nebuchadnezzar made this image of gold 90 feet high, and there's so many things that you can look at and take out of this account. But I'm going to paraphrase it for you. This is the book of Daniel, right? Obviously, Daniel chapter 3. And 3 of the young men that were exiled with Daniel to Babylon from amongst the Jewish people were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And a decree was given out by King Nebuchadnezzar, who said, when you hear the sound of the music, and it goes on to list all these instruments, the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the zither, there's all these different instruments that are going to play. And when you hear the sound of this, you have to bow down in worship, in obedience, and exalt and give proclamation and proclaim and worship to King Nebuchadnezzar, because he proclaimed himself really to be a god. So verse 7 speaks about this, and it says, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. Well, there's a surprise for you, somebody denouncing the Jews. Here we are in 2020, and COVID's going on and has been going on, and nobody even knows what's going on, but people are blaming the Jews for that, and going all the way back, as far back as you want to go, even looking at the book of Esther. There has always been the strategy of the enemy to blame the Jews. So this is not anything new. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. And they go on to remind the king of the decree that he had issued, being that every single person had to bow down and worship this image of gold that he had kind of had set up, right? This 90-foot high, 90-foot wide monstrosity of a statue. Verse 12, but there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Then in verse 13, we see King Nebuchadnezzar is furious with rage, and he's ranting and he's wild and he's throwing a giant temper tantrum, and he tells his men to heat up the furnace 7 times hotter than it is. And while these men are making this furnace hot, some of the flames jump out and kill the men that are making the fire that hot, so you can imagine how hot it would have been. And then they give them one last chance. You're going to hear the music, and if you do not bow down when you hear the music, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to go in that fire pit right there, guys. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. Verse 18, but even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. And that right there, that verse 18 of these 3 young guys who stood up against a tyrannical king who had exiled so many nations, who had people gathered from far and wide, gathered, bowing in worship to him, proclaiming his greatness. These 3 young Jewish boys, and I picture it, I imagine the sea of humanity. And if you could imagine in our terms, if there was a movie shot, right, and there was a drone sweeping shot, you would just see this sea of people kneeling, bowing, and somewhere in that sea, 3 lone figures are standing. And what ends up happening in the story is these boys do get thrown into the fire, but then suddenly the gods cry out and they say, look, there is a 4th man standing in the fire. And for those of you that remember Kim's song about the 4th man in the fire, I loved that one. But what ends up happening is that they go in, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fire, they escape unscathed, they don't even smell like smoke. And the king ends up issuing a decree that the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the God of Israel, needs to be worshipped. But before that happened, before the rescue came, before there was any certainty of survival, these 3 young men refused to bow down to the music of Babylon. They would not do it because physical death for disobedience to a Babylonian king was far better than spiritual death for disobedience to the great king of Israel. And I often think about that in our terms today, about the pressures that we face. We might not have a physical 90-foot gold statue, but there are statues of ideology. There are statues of social movements. There are statues of politics, different things that have been erected, that have been lifted up, that have been exalted. And nowadays, it's not necessarily one Babylonian king called Nebuchadnezzar saying, bow down to this, but the media, the mainstream media, most certainly blasts that trumpet and projects those images. And even within the Christian community, we can find ourselves being pressured to lower our knees and to take the stance of yieldedness to something that is not from God. And my encouragement to you is whatever it is, when you know in your heart, and I have found myself in this place, I am talking in code here because I cannot say the things I want to say, and that is very difficult for me. I'm just being honest. Sometimes Charlie can say the things I want to say, and I love him for that, but I can't. But whatever pressures you might be facing, the social ones, the political ones, the media-driven ones, even sometimes the social justice cause ones, when you know in your heart that something is not from God, my encouragement to you is don't bow to the music. These 3 young guys inspire me. They challenge me. They make me realize what intense weakness I've walked in and what intense strength I aspire to. And I know at times I have bowed to the music because what bowing meant in that time was community. It meant survival. It meant approval. And in our day and age, even within the modern kingdom of Christendom, within Christianity, if you stand up for unpopular truth, you risk so many things. And I'm saying this with full awareness because I have gone through this battle myself. To not bow can mean you're ostracized. To not bow means that you can end up risking relationships with family and friends. To not bow can even mean you're labeled as things that don't belong to you. But just like these 3 young, brave Hebrew boys, as they stood while the sea of humanity knelt, my encouragement is for us to find that strength in our God and know that we will not bow to the music of Babylon, even when that music comes across as popular, even when that music comes across as the right thing to do. When we know in our hearts that something is not from God, we stand and we bow only in reverence to the great King of the universe, to whom, for whom, in whom all things exist. And so I know that might have been a little more intense than usual for me today, but I'm feeling it right now. And I just was like, do you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm just going to go for this. And my encouragement to you is don't bow to the music. We only bow to the music of our great King. So God bless you this week. I pray for courage. I pray for strength. I pray for an ability for you to stand. God bless you.